Hey friends, welcome out to another episode of Andrew Good Camera. I'm here in one of my favorite places to do some photography when I'm on vacation in San Diego with Danae, although I don't know where she is right now. And this little guy, Ace, who is being very distracted by all of the people walking around. And we're just having a good time. I've been wanting to do this video for a long time, just haven't had time. So we're using our leisure vacation time to do that, and that is a comparison video on three lenses that I really like. Of course, the first lens is on the camera here. That's you. It is my favorite lens, the Fuji 16mm 1.4. And I want to compare wide-angle lenses from three different camera brands. There are a lot of Fuji wide-angle lenses right now available for Fuji, of course, and it would be hard to be, especially as far as primes go, and it would be hard to be exhaustive on all of those and compare them all. So I picked three that just are different brands. So I've got the 16-1.4 Fuji, as I said, and then I also brought along the Sigma 16mm 1.4, and we'll be comparing these two. And then also, it's not the 16mm, it's much wider. It's the 13mm Viltrox lens. So it's not apples to apples comparison. And I know that there are other lenses we could use to compare to. There's the Zeiss, also 12mm, and there's other wide angle Fuji lenses that we could compare to. But these are the three that I'm interested in comparing, so that's what we're going to compare. So it's kind of a cross-brand wide-angle prime lens battle. We're gonna go start photographing. I've already done some here in San Diego. We're gonna do some more, and then I'm gonna talk about the differences physically in shooting these. We'll probably do that first, show you some photos so you can see the difference in image quality and let you decide which one is right for you. And clearly, if you feel like you can make the Viltrox or the Sigma work for your needs, your pocketbook is going to thank you. But before we go any further into the review, and while we're talking about price here, I am excited to tell you about this video sponsor, KEH. KEH is a pre-owned camera gear shop that's dedicated to helping photographers improve their craft. On KEH.com, you'll find these lenses that we're talking about today, but also over 60,000 others, each with a significant savings over brand new gear. And I know for years I've been telling you about KEH, and I focused on many aspects that I love about them, but one thing I haven't mentioned as much about, but which is hugely important, is how KEH helps with sustainability. For over 4 decades, KEH has been committed to promoting a circular lifestyle of pre-owned gear, which not only extends the usefulness of the cameras and lenses, but it also helps reduce the number of items that end up in landfills. So buying and selling used equipment at KEH is not only cost-effective, but it's also an environmentally conscious choice. You can be confident that your equipment has been thoroughly cleaned, tested, and also graded before purchase. Plus, with that free 180-day warranty and a generous 21-day return policy, you can shop with peace of mind. As always, KEH has given us discounts that we can pass on to you for your first order, and a bonus if you choose to sell your gear. See the links in the video description below. Thanks KEH for sponsoring this video. We'll now turn back to the video and get into some physical aspects of these lenses. So, aperture rings. That's one of the first things you notice when you compare these. The aperture ring of the Fuji 16mm 1.4 is really loose, easy to move. That might be because mine's just well loved and well used. Maybe they're a little stiffer when you first buy it, but mine is easy to turn. Whereas the Viltrox, one thing I've always noticed with Viltrox, the 13mm especially, is just it's really difficult, almost to the point where it's a pain, where if you're in a hurry, it's gonna slow you down. So aperture rings, and they both have aperture rings, whereas the Sigma does not. So you're gonna be using the front dial with the Sigma, which I really don't like. I wish that it had an aperture ring. So that's one way that these are different. Also, when it comes to focusing. If you're manually focusing, which I do quite a bit, it's going to be most enjoyable with the Fuji because it has hard stops on the focus ring. But it also has a clutch focus, which I used to love, but more and more that I shoot with Fuji, I don't love it because I'm so used to changing to manual focus here. And it's one thing that I complained about earlier when I talked about the Viltrox 75mm, that it actually has a switch on the, what am I doing? A switch on the lens. I don't know why, but with this Viltrox it doesn't, which I appreciate, that you can still use the switch on the camera rather than a switch on the lens to get it to manual focus. But what I don't like about Viltrox and the Sigma is that it's a focus by wire and it's an infinite kind of spin focus. That's what you're usually going to get with mirrorless cameras. But the one reason that I think that the Fuji is superior is because you can expect the focus ring to stop, to have hard stops, and you actually get a focus indicators, which is really, really nice for those of you who zone focus or focus manually like I do. So those are some physical differences between the lenses. Other than that, when it comes to weight and size, they're all very similar. They all have a similar feel. You get a little bit more rubbery grip with the Sigma, which I like, whereas everything else, the other two lenses, feel a little bit more metallic. But other than that, they're very similar with weight and size. I guess that the Fuji is a little more stubby than these longer lenses, but it's not that big of a difference. So that's some of the physical differences between these lenses.
When it comes to sharpness, they are fairly close, so I wouldn't worry too much about making a buying decision based on that. Keep in mind there will be variation in lenses also, so my results could be different than yours with the lenses that you get. Based on my copies, Fuji is slightly sharper, but not by a large margin, and not by enough that I would make a buying decision based on that, as I mentioned. And that's even with it being my most used lens of all lenses I've ever owned. After 7 years of use, I've got to think that it's not quite as sharp as it was when I started, and yet it is still sharpest of these three. When it comes to the Sigma, it seemed to be the softest for me, especially wide open, but more than the other lenses, it was more consistent across aperture lenses, though I'm not sure that's much of a selling point, since its overall sharpness wasn't particularly stunning. Still, it's sufficient for my needs and probably most of you. The Viltrox would have fared better if it weren't for a random soft spot on the lens that I noticed. I've never really seen that before and I'm not sure what would account for it, but other than that, it was as nearly as sharp as the Fuji 16-1.4 to my eye. When it comes to bokeh quality, the 16-1.4 takes the cake here, and not just because you can get more shallow depth of field due to that up-close focus, which we'll come back to in a minute. It's just smoother, and it's less nervous. You really see that nervous bokeh quality here from the Sigma and the Viltrox, both at f2.8 in the palm tree. But as I often say, what is in focus is much more important than what is out of focus. And the only people who tend to care that much about tiny differences in bokeh quality are photographers. So I'm not sure that I would make a purchasing decision based on bokeh quality. But what I do think is a big deal is maximum reproduction ratio. You can really see the difference in these lenses here with this shot. The Fuji 16-1.4 has really great max reproduction ratio. In other words, you can focus really close. At a 1 to 4.8 ratio, that means that objects that are the same width as the Fuji sensor will take up about a fifth of the width of the image. In my book, that's pretty good, and it's very handy in weddings when you're photographing details or on a nature hike and you want to photograph bugs or plants. With roughly a 1 to 10 ratio from both the Viltrox 13 and the Sigma 16 in my book, it just doesn't cut it. As someone who loves to photograph everything from the epic scenery to the tiny details, this is just not nearly enough. It's a deal breaker for me, even at their low price point, but for others of you, maybe that's not an issue. As for chromatic aberration and flaring, I didn't find any issues with any of these lenses really. It's controlled pretty well, as is usually the cases with modern lenses of any degree of quality and with coating. As far as color shifting, I didn't find any real difference. I didn't test color rendering significantly, but to the naked eye, color was identical. and I didn't really pay attention to vignetting, as these days it's easy to autocorrect, and distortion didn't appear to be an issue with any of these lenses either. So final conclusions. All three of these lenses are very good quality. The Viltrox and Sigma were slightly less sharp than the Fuji, but all are sufficient for my needs. And even with that less than smooth bokeh, the prices of the Viltrox and the Sigma make them extremely tempting. For me, if it were between those two, I'd probably choose the Viltrox simply for that aperture ring. But neither can substitute adequately for the magic of the 16mm 1.4 and what it can provide when it comes to close focusing. Also, fit and finish is nice and slightly smoother bokeh. So for my money, it's worth the extra price. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see more of my videos in the future early and also without any ad interruptions, head on over to my Patreon and become a member for just $5 a month. In the meantime, remember to do good with your camera, and we'll talk to you again real soon.